Parent Training Information Center. And like Roseanne said, every state has at least one parent training center to help families understand what their rights are, plan for meetings, and just be able to be another resource for families. By the end of the meeting, I'm going to make sure that my contact info is in there, should you have any questions afterward. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Now this little thing it goes away when I want it to, when I don't want it to, and then shows up when I don't need it. Let's see if I can get to my, there we go. I think after 5 years, we'd be skilled at this, right? Okay, just a few reminders. Please keep yourself muted unless you want to say something. Feel free to ask questions during the presentation. Just remember that, this is being recorded, so we want to keep the questions kind of general, not specific questions about a child or individual. We can do that afterwards by turning off the recording, but you can use the chat to ask them questions too. We have Sue monitoring that. And let us know if you have any needs. Those can be met. So today we'll be talking about writing a state complaint, information for families and professionals. I'm going to go back a second here. The mission of the PEAL Center is to educate and empower families to ensure that children, youth, and young adults with disabilities and special health care needs lead rich, active lives as full members of their schools and communities. I'm not sure what our poll was, so we're going to have to skip over that. Our objectives today are to describe the laws protecting the rights of families to resolve disputes involving IEP implementation at school, list the purposes of a state complaint, describe steps that you need to take to file the state complaint. Really don't have any statistics regarding state complaints, but we'll go into that a little bit, and list resources available to help you file a state complaint. So what does IDEA say about state complaints? When we say state education agency, that means Pennsylvania Department of Ed. Their role is that they must have a system in place for a parent, an advocate, an attorney, or another person to file a compliance complaint. So anyone basically can file a complaint if you are aware of what the issues are. At an Federal Office of Special Education Program conference a couple years ago, they even said that where there is credible evidence of non-compliance, that the state should be made aware, could be made aware, and they would have to take action. So even if you're not filing a state complaint, if there's credible evidence, and this was even, this was described by the Office of Special Education Programs, even if there's a news clip that says something about non-compliance, you can contact the Bureau of Special Education, and it's something they have to look into and investigate. Pennsylvania Department of Ed has to let families and others know how to file a complaint and where to find the forms needed. So usually this is on the Office of Dispute Resolution website, odr-pa.org, or on the Pennsylvania Department of Ed website, not as easy to find there, but it is there also. So if an investigation finds the complaint is valid, a corrective action is made. And this can include compensatory education. We'll go through resolution later. The investigation is done by a special education advisor employed by the Pennsylvania Department of Ed. They do run things by their attorneys. Some states have attorneys that actually do the investigation, but in PA, we have the special education advisor that investigates and writes up their findings. And then the school must remedy or fix the situation for any student who is similarly situated by the issue. There was a systemic one that PEAL did a few years ago, where all special education students were leaving school early. The school said it was to, get the students out before any the commotion of the end of the day. But as we know, IDEA says, no, they're entitled to be there as long as any other student. So that complaint was written, and the school had to remedy that, or the district had to remedy that situation for all students who were in that situation. So before you begin, as with all steps, make sure that you've called an IEP team meeting for the student's IEP. I would, I had to file some state complaints for my son when he was in school, and I would make sure that there was an email sent to the school letting them know about any compliance issues that were going on. And if it wasn't remedied and I had to go through with the complaint, then that was used as documentation as part of the complaint. It's best to try and resolve the issue without having to go to the complaint. But if that can't be done, this is the method we have to resolve complaints. It is not adversarial. I say that because it's in the law as our right. So, if the district has not done anything wrong, then, the investigation will find that. But if there are issues of noncompliance, then the corrective action is made, and we look to improve that. Then it's really just to improve programming on the part of the district. Usually chances are, if it's happening to one person, it's likely happening to others. So it's just to improve programming. And I think with all, with all dispute resolution, that's kind of the way we have to approach it, is that this is to remedy something that just isn't right at the moment. Doesn't speak to any, ongoing or long-term issues in a district, but let's just get this fixed. And make sure all relevant parties are there at the IEP meeting. You might want to take a look at a document that the PEAL Center has, communication tips for building strong partnerships. Gives some ideas for trying to resolve issues. And one thing I really like about the communication tips is that on the back page is kind of the ladder for escalating an issue, so that you're not going too far when you're still in early stages of trying to resolve an issue. But you start with your team. Maybe if you're not getting the team together, maybe talk to the principal, find out what's going on, and then escalate it as needed. So it's important to remember when you're filing a complaint that these are a procedural safeguard, meaning that the school isn't following something that's in the law. It's not like if you talk about appropriateness of placement or of appropriateness of how long a child might be getting a related service or how long they're entitled to, then you're talking more of a substantive issue, which can be remedied by mediation or due process. But really, state complaints are much easier to file just because we want to get that resolved as soon as we can. And just a way to, without a lot of back and forth, resolve an issue. But, they can be used then in place of mediation or due process when it's a procedural issue, when it has to do with not implementing the law. Minimal time, no cost. And often one of the resolutions for a state complaint, let's say you're filing a complaint because the IEP says that a child gets, once a week has 30 minutes of speech and language therapy, but the school hasn't been able to replace a speech therapist who's out, so he's been missing, let's say, 4 weeks. So the student is still entitled to that time, but that person not being there, you could request compensatory education, make up education for what was lost while that wasn't provided. So know that that's always an issue for or a resolution. I like to include too that training occurs for staff and administration. At some point there was maybe a breakdown in communication, or someone isn't aware of what the law says about what's to be provided for a student. So it's always important to, have that training happen so that everybody is on the same page, understands what the laws are, understands what a child is entitled to. So with most complaints, either that I file or, I'm helping a family with, I'm probably going to look at, if it's appropriate, having training for staff and administration. And it is effective in resolving conflicts with the school. It isn't something like due process where you're looking at, the important thing about resolving conflict is wanting to maintain relationship. And the state complaint is such that, there is opportunity given to the district to remedy the issue before the complaint is investigated. And, they might decide that, oh yeah, that's right, that did happen, and they resolve the issue. And then it's up to the parent if you want to have that complaint then go forward, or if you're deciding to withdraw the complaint. Because there could be other students that are being affected by the same practice, or, for whatever reason. I usually, felt strongly enough about my issues with complaints that I would allow them to go through, just so it was kind of on the books that this is the way that the law works, and this is what we as families should expect from the district regarding the law. Definitely less costly. There's no one else you have to engage. If you do call the ARC or you call PEAL, we can help you out with that. There's no cost in that. Much less intimidating. No money is going to be taken from the school. There are no fines. If the school is found out of compliance, then there may be different resolutions that they have to put into place. But otherwise, this is just something that can be done probably quickly. It's not difficult. There's 3 questions or 3 statements that have to be answered. And in fact, it's can be filed by others who are familiar with the issue. And like we talked about, resolution of a state complaint can often be that compensatory education. So this is kind of what we want to talk about when we look at what kind of dispute resolution am I going to use? So again, the state complaint is with disputes involving procedural issues, things that are in the law that aren't being followed. So, a timeline, that could be a procedural issue if something isn't done within a timeline. Or the example here, the occupational therapist goes on maternity leave and there's no one to provide the services. And then the child misses out on their services. The Pennsylvania Department of Ed is the one that investigates complaints. Sometimes folks think that ODR, the Office for Dispute Resolution, is the one that does that, but ODR will be quick to tell you, no, they have no part in investigating or writing state complaints. While you can find the complaint form on ODR's website, they are not part of the investigation of that. Now, if you're talking about mediation or due process, these are disputes that talk more about the appropriateness of services. And that decision then has to be made in mediation by the two parties, the family and the school, with the help of a trained mediator. Or if that, you look at going to due process where the decision making is taken out of our hands, the schools and the families, and put into the hands of the hearing officer, a third party who makes those decisions. So if the school district is saying that occupational therapy is going to be once a month, but the family says that's not nearly enough, we need once a week for this child, and they can't come to resolution, then you're probably going to go, I would always suggest requesting mediation first. Mediation, there's no cost to the family. The mediator is provided by the Office of Dispute Resolution. Families do not have to have an attorney to go to mediation. That rule was only changed a few years ago when ODR and the Special Education Advisory Panel said, okay, let's have attorneys attend. But if you take a look at the statistics that come out, or the data that comes out from the Office of Dispute Resolution, mediations are usually more effective when the family's just going by themselves and there's the family is working with the school district to come up with a resolution to the issue. So if the family doesn't bring an attorney, then the school will not have their attorney present at a mediation. Due process, that's another animal. In that case, the school will have an attorney present, whether the parent has an attorney or does the due process on their own, which as an advocate, I can't recommend or suggest. And often this is a very big concern for families is retaliation. It is scary. It's scary to think about, calling someone to the carpet, telling them, you didn't do this for my child's entitled to this. If the family has other children in the district, you worry about what's going to happen with the other children. We have a lot of folks that call up who have jobs within the school district and are very worried about their jobs when it comes to, filing a complaint or having a conflict with the district. But again, these are our rights, and the state complaint is, again, a way to improve programming. In general, a family member, the same as we say that we're going to make the assumption that everyone in the school district wants to do the best for our child. In that same way, we want the best for our children as a family member. And if that's not happening, we will do what's in our power, what we're able to do to help remedy the situation. And one of those things happens to be a state complaint. Again, and Roseanne kind of reminded me in the beginning of this, or maybe it was Mandy. If the school's doing nothing wrong, then it's going to come back and show that. That's what the investigation will show. But if there's an issue of non-compliance, which could happen to anyone, anywhere, anytime, then this is a way to improve that programming, not only for the student, but for other students who could be similarly situated in the school. It is not adversarial. And the same, with mediation, we're making a real effort to come to a reasonable agreement. So we don't go into this as being adversarial. It's not wanting to, get in the ring. It's just that we want what is our child is entitled to and what's going to make them successful. For us as parents, there's not a retirement plan. We have to, we are the ones that live with the consequences, good or bad, of any decisions that are made regarding our child in school. And that's one thing I say about my son. I did have to go to due process once, but I never regretted anything I had to do for him to ensure that he was getting what he needed in school to be successful. And now I feel he's successful. He has had a job for 12 years. He drives a car. That didn't happen right away. That was a lot of work. But it's still things that happened in school that allow him to be successful in this way.
Cindy, this might be a good place just because you mentioned due process
Yeah.
and the state complaint process. Sally Richards asked, can you do both a state complaint and due process?
Well, there's no real double dipping. At that point, I would decide what's going to be the least adversarial, the least intense way of resolving an issue. If you do the complaint, which, very easy, done, investigated, and if found non-compliant, the corrective action is all laid out in a report within 60 days. But due process, it's very intense. There's an emotional toll, there's a financial toll. If you can avoid that at any point, I would suggest we avoid that at any point. So if the complaint comes back and it's not the outcome you were looking for, sure, go ahead, file a due process. But, that's just, that's why there are so many options through ODR and through the state complaint system at PDE, is so we can get the issue resolved with the least amount of that emotional and financial toll to be taken. And again, to preserve relationships. I know Peter Wright, if you're familiar with Peter Wright, says that special education is marriage with no chance of divorce. So that's, kind of the attitude you have to have when you're figuring out, how am I going to resolve this issue?
Cindy, there's a follow-up comment to what you just said. Catherine asks, if other families have the same complaint, should we all file a complaint?
I would usually say that, there is power in numbers. So, as part of that OSEP leadership guidance that we were given a few years ago about credible evidence, another thing that was shared at that conference was that if a number of families are finding a very similar complaint, the state can decide to do a targeted monitoring of the school district. And this would, it possibly could prompt then a targeted monitoring of the school district if they were to get a number of complaints. So looking at resolving issues. And again, this isn't about getting back at somebody. This is about ensuring that our kids are getting what they're entitled to and what they need to be successful in school. So know that that's, on the books. And if you have a question about it, feel free to call the PEAL Center or ARC, and, we can help you understand that better. So section 504, a lot of kids have 504 plans for whatever reason, also provides protection against retaliation. What we used to say was that if you file a complaint, it is sometimes a good idea, if that was something that parents had a fear about or a concern about, that you could contact the Office of Civil Rights, ask them to put your complaint on file. Not that they were investigating it, it was just on file because a parent had a fear of retaliation. I'm going to try and say this as delicately as I can. OCR right now isn't well staffed. So what I've been suggesting to families is if there's issues of discrimination, or if you feel that there's possibly retaliation in you filing a complaint, or even mediation or due process. In Pennsylvania, we do have civil rights law, and that's called the PA Human Relations Act. And that is supported by the PA Human Relations Commission. They also have a complaint system that you can file a complaint for discrimination or retaliation based on the child having disability. So know that that's, another avenue that we can take in Pennsylvania when, some complaints going to the Office of Civil Rights and Education are just, sitting on desks waiting, may never get resolved. I mean, before the current administration that, cut a lot of that staffing, complaints would sometimes take a number of years to resolve. So I've really started turning to the PA Human Relations Commission to help us out on those issues. And it's, part of, again, those rights is that an advocate may file a complaint on behalf of a student or students. There was an issue that came up that the PEAL Center heard about a number of years ago, had to do with early intervention, and it was happening to all the students within an IU. So we filed that complaint, and on behalf of, turns out it was numbers in the thousands of children that were affected, and the complaint was found to be something that the IU had to remedy. And like I said, that was a large number of students. So again, it is effective. State complaints are effective. When can you file a state complaint? When the school, the local education agency, is not following the Disabilities with Education Act or Chapter 14, PA Code for Special Ed in PA, or a 504 plan. In Pennsylvania, you do have those protections for 504. If the 504 is not being followed, again, a legal document, then you can file a complaint for not implementing a 504 plan. So again, some examples of, what you might, of things that might happen where you need to file a complaint. The school isn't providing something that's in the IEP or the 504 anywhere in that document. The entire document is legally binding, so that's what we're looking at. Related services that are in the IEP or 504 that are not being provided. The school doesn't schedule a meeting that the parent has requested. Again, that's why you want to keep that documentation. I always call it the first rule in advocacy is document. So you want to, if you're requesting a meeting, it's best to do that via an email or even a written letter requesting that meeting, so that as part of the complaint, if you'd have to file a complaint on that, you have the documentation of when you requested that. And if you have to do a follow-up through an email. Sometimes I know families will say, "Oh, the school just calls me. They don't send an email." And you can follow up with that by sending an email saying, "Oh, thanks so much for the call today. This is what we discussed." That way you are documenting it. And, in sending that to the school, they do have documentation that phone call or, discussion in the hallway did happen and what was discussed. A child with an IEP is let out of school earlier than other students. I gave you that scenario earlier. Or if the school takes longer than 60 calendar days to complete an evaluation or reevaluation, or any timeline within special education. So those are some examples of what's in the law, what we, as families, what we expect to happen. And then if those things don't happen as they're stated in the law, that's a complaint. So we can put some of this info in the chat. This first is the link to the complaints. The form should be printed and filled out and signed. It's a PDF, so, however you want to get that completed. If you want to print it out and write it, or you can, figure out how you want to get the info in there and then sign it. Then the original with the signatures is sent to the Pennsylvania Department of Ed. That's on the instructions, and a copy sent to the school. It's important to remember that piece about the copy being sent to the school, because the investigation won't begin until that happens. The original, along with all of the documentation and that you need to attach, all needs to be sent to the Pennsylvania Department of Ed. But the school should have all of that backup documentation. So all you have to send to the school is the copy of the complaint itself. Now, with state complaints, they have to be filed within 1 year from the date of the noncompliance. While due process can go back 2 years, state complaints can go back only 1 year. So keep that in mind as you're, deciding what kind of dispute resolution you want to use and what's going to work for you. So going through the process, you print out the state form, the family completes it, signs it, and again, one copy of that goes to the Pennsylvania Department of Ed, and another one goes to the school. Usually, if you're sending it, I would, this one you can send to the school through an email and send it to the principal, send it to the special education director, or whoever you feel is appropriate. I usually like to send more than one person, so that, if it goes in somebody's spam folder, we know somebody's going to get it. And then the Pennsylvania Department of Ed investigator, sometimes we call those special education advisors, single point of contact. They investigate the complaint. And within 60 calendar days, the investigator issues their findings, and if needed, the corrective action. So here's the form. You're going to see contact info for the family, information about the student, information about the school, who we want interviewed. The person that's going to be doing the investigating has to know and have the contact information for who we are interviewing. So we're going to put that contact information in there. If you need some help with that, you can either call the school, or we can help you find that. Art can help you find that. It should all be on the, I usually use the internet and use the school district's contact info. And then an original signature needs to be on that form.
Cindy, there's a question. I think it means when is FAPE not appropriate for the student or child? Is that what you meant to say, Catherine?
No, it's not. I'm so sorry
Sorry.
about the typo
Yeah.
there.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
yes.
Okay, sorry, I have headphones on, just trying to focus here. So, when you're filing a complaint and you have the examples listed, um, what if your child was in a class that is, that their peers take? However, the content was not modified for them to be able to learn it because they were with general population with an aid, but they still didn't learn the content. Is that an appropriate complaint against the state when it goes against state laws of what needs to be taught? And I'm just going to say what it is because I think it's relevant. It's when it refers to reproductive health.
So what we have to look at is what is in the IEP, and the IEP says they will modify the work. If the instruction isn't modified at all, then this is a reason for a state complaint.
It was not modified.
If it wasn't modified at all, right?
No. Thank you for explaining that. Go ahead, keep going. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So if it's a question about the appropriateness of the modification, then you'd want to be looking at a mediation. So, if the IEP says that the work is going to be modified, based on the unique circumstances of the child, and it's not modified at all, then we'd file a complaint. If it was about the appropriateness, then we have to go to either mediation or due process.
Thank you. One more quick question on that. What if it was asked to be modified but denied?
If this is happening during an IEP meeting, that the request was made to modify the work, the instruction, and the school said, no, we're not going to modify that section. Families can ask for prior written notice about a rejection that was made at an IEP meeting, and then you can pursue the mediation or due process.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate your time.
You bet, Catherine. So the first question or the first statement that's in a complaint is, tell us what happened. And, again, referring to Pete Wright, you want to complete this like you were describing it to a stranger. Leave out the emotion. It's really tough as a parent to do that, but what the investigator is going to look at is facts. And emotion won't lend to their decision. So look at the facts. If you were someone who was on the street and you wanted to describe this to them, how would you describe it to them? And again, you want to think from the viewpoint of non-compliance as it relates to the law. What wasn't done that in the law that wasn't done by the school? And statement 2 is about the facts. And in this part, usually families are going to have to include the IEP itself that says, that says what's going to happen. Any emails that you have, any other kind of documentation that you have that shows that the whatever the complaint is about wasn't followed. This could be emails that went back and forth, homework from the child, notes or, again, emails that as the parent, you might have followed up with on a phone call, things like that. I like to include in this facts part, the parts of the law that were in non-compliance. If you go to Patten's website, pattan.net, and look for their side-by-side of Chapter 14 and IDEA, I usually find that an easy place to look at what part of the law am I talking about. And again, you know, either of your advocacy organizations here can help you out in finding what those parts of the law are. The investigator is going to do this anyway. It kind of helps them out. It kind of helps you as you're writing the complaint figure out, you know, am I reading this correctly? Am I understanding this correctly? That what I'm making the complaint about is really what the law says. So that's kind of just a reminder to myself when I'm doing a complaint that, yeah, indeed, this is what I'm complaining about. This wasn't done for my child, and this is the reason for the complaint. It doesn't have to be the whole part, but just the part that relates to the areas that you're filing the complaint about. I just found it helpful to include in the complaint.
Cindy, Catherine asked if you would use ChatGPT to write the complaint.
I have not done that.
Okay.
That's up to you. So number 3, they ask you to suggest a resolution or a solution. So if you're looking for compensatory education and any education that was missed, you can ask for that. Usually for, you know, in issues where a related service wasn't provided, you're usually looking for hour compensation. So if the teacher was out for a month and the child missed 2 hours, then you're looking for 2 hours of compensatory education to be made up. Compensatory education isn't, it's, you know, what was made up, what to make up for what was lost. So it's not in addition to anything else, but what was lost. So again, for another example, speech language pathologist was on maternity leave. The school didn't have a substitute, therefore the service was not provided to the student. For example, this occurred in 8 sessions of 1 hour each, and as a remedy, the parent may request 8 hours of compensatory education. That's an example. In the situation of, you know, a timeline that doesn't find a child eligible, or that finds a child eligible, but that was, you know, the timeline was off. You could look at compensatory education, but it would take more of a, probably more of a formula to look at, since you're not looking at that hour for hour compensation. So if the district wasn't following IDEA and may need to be trained again in understanding that part of the law, maybe it was misunderstood by the admin or the teachers, and they just need a training to occur, then that may be suggested. And, you know, the corrective action will speak to that. School districts do have to comply with the corrective action. A parent should expect that that corrective action is going to be completed by the school, and it's up to PDE to follow through to ensure that that corrective action was done. I have heard instances where the corrective action is not done, and we do look to PDE then to follow up with that. So an example here was the school didn't agree to an IEP meeting when it was requested by the parent. And let's talk about reasonableness. If a parent is asking for, a meeting every day of the week, that might not be reasonable, but in most cases, when parents ask for a meeting, they expect that a meeting is going to be held. And that is what the law says. So we'd be looking for that. As a remedy, the parent may suggest administration and teachers be provided training regarding mandates of IDEA by the school. And again, this is one of those gentle reminders of what is expected to happen from IDEA. So what's the follow-up? If the complaint was found valid, the investigator will issue the corrective action, and it has to be completed in the timeline that the investigator put in the report. If the complaint was found unfounded, the complainant will receive a letter from the Department of Ed letting them know, and you'll be notified that within 10 days, and note that that is 10 days from the date on the letter. So it's not 10 days from when you receive it, it's 10 days from the date on the letter, if you could produce any new or additional information that might change the outcome. If there's no response after that 10 days, the complaint will be considered resolved and closed.
Do you know if you received that, is that letter come through the mail, like the postal service, or if that?
I have always received it through the mail.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So kind of a summary of what we've gone through already. It is not a difficult process to resolve procedural issues of noncompliance. Again, things that are in the law that aren't being followed. There's no cost of filing a state complaint. You might find cost in, having to mail the documentation to Harrisburg. As far as we know right now, or as far as you can't file a complaint via email because they need that original signature. So I can only go by what I know right now. So that's always been that rule of thumb. If you're willing to file a complaint, it's generally unlikely that you would be a target for retaliation. Again, retaliation is against the law. At this point, a family kind of knows what they're talking about. So to come back and retaliate, again, this is a family who knows where to get resources. There just wouldn't be a reason for it. And in general, there's not a reason for it anyway. The findings from the investigation will tell us whether the school was in compliance or not in compliance. And, then after the corrective action, that should be a done deal. Resolution is often compensatory education. So keep that in mind. There are, many other resolutions that can take place. So whatever is needed for that specific complaint is what I would look at as far as resolution. And again, a state complaint may resolve noncompliance for any child under similar circumstances within the district. But, if it's a systemic issue, it's happening to more than just one student, then, if the parents were to decide to file state complaints, there is the possibility that the state would decide to do a targeted monitoring to help resolve the issue within the district. Maybe the district needs more support. Maybe they need some help from the IU or from Patton. This is going to get that done. That should be a good thing. I did want to mention too the call resolution process. we're lucky that our Office for Dispute Resolution considered an exemplar as far as these similar offices in the state. IDEA does say that the ODR, or that an independent entity, has to provide these services to families. And they often, in the case of Pennsylvania, the Office for Dispute Resolution often comes up with additional early dispute resolution to help families, to help schools. And the call resolution is one of those things. It's not mandated, but it is very helpful in certain situations. So it's only for issues of noncompliance. It begins when a parent makes a call to the consult line. And if it's something that can be resolved quickly, resolved with an email that's sent to the school and said, hey, we've heard from a parent, they've made note of a noncompliance issue. They're the ones that come up with the email. They'll send it to the parent to make sure that, everything is true and what's in it is correct. But it should be easy enough as following up from that email that's sent by ODR. They'll send the email to the school, the special ed director, and copy in the P2E special education advisor, just to let them know. And then the school special education director and the advisor will decide how to follow up. And of course, that's going to take a lot less than 60 days. So sometimes this is a good alternate to filing a complaint. There's no record of it, but if it's just something simple that needs to be resolved, and it hasn't been resolved in some emails to certain people in the school district, then it might be a good idea to try call resolution.
Cindy, Catherine is looking. She's looking for some clarity about that. Is that something you would do before the complaint, or sort of along with a complaint?
There would be no need to do it along with the complaint. It's instead of filing a complaint. If it is a simple issue, that I don't know, like, you filed, or a parent requested a meeting and they have heard nothing for, let's say, 5 days. There's been no response from the school. A simple email from the Office for Dispute Resolution to the school district might be a way to just move that along a little quicker. I would expect someone to respond to me within 5 days from the school. So, this call resolution process could be a way to just move that along quicker. If you find through call resolution that the issue was not resolved, then sure, go ahead and file the complaint. But there'd be no reason to do both at the exact same time. So we're looking for some info here, some contact resources for you. PEAL Center's phone number, or our info mailbox where you can ask a question there. PEAL Center also on our website has a need to talk button at the top, and that's www.pealcenter.org on our website. And you can fill out information there and we'll get back to you. The consult line where you can ask questions, or initiate that call resolution process. There's their contact information, PDE's email, the RA email. If you have one of those issues of credible evidence, you can send it through the RA account. I can tell you that the RA account is monitored by the Bureau Director. And then she forwards those to the special education advisors that would take care of it. But, I wouldn't inundate her with using the RA account, but in issues where you're completely stuck, you don't know what road to take, and you'd want them to know of something that's going on, I'd go ahead and send it there. And to find special ed advisors for your intermediate unit, you can go to this next link, and their contact info is there too. They are to be available for families as well as for schools. If there's a question that you have around compliance, do feel free to contact the special education advisor from PDE for your area. Here's some other
Cindy, I
resources.
did put those in the chat, including the special education advisors link. Roseanne's going to send these in a separate email for you guys too.
Oh, that'll be fantastic. So there is a Q&A on Part B, dispute resolution procedures, on Cadre's website. Cadre is a great site to use for dispute resolution. There's a section dedicated just to families, very helpful. And regarding PDE complaint procedures, there's the documentation. It gives you instructions as well as the document you need to file that complaint. And here's the other complaint links, one for Pennsylvania Department of Ed, one for OCR, Office of Civil Rights, and for the PA Human Relations Commission. If you've never been on the PA Human Relations Commission's website, I'd take a look at them to see how they can be helpful. They're helpful in other areas besides education. So just a really great resource in the state of Pennsylvania. And again, if you have questions, you can contact the PEAL Center, talk to a family resource specialist, look at the website and the need to talk button. And here's our evaluation for today's training on writing a state complaint. This is information we need. We forward this to the federal government where we get our grants. They're interested in what you have to say, how we're helping or not helping families. So feel free to scan that with your phone. Writing a state complaint is the name of today's training. And we appreciate you. Thanks for being here and taking the time. Are there any other outstanding questions?
Do we miss anything in the chat? Because after that, I have a few questions people sent.
Let me see here. Yes, the question was, can we ask questions off recording?
Yes, and I was just gonna say, I'm gonna stop the recording and then we can open up the floor to questions. So
Perfect.